Have you ever imagined being left behind by the person you loved most simply because time passed and you were no longer considered interesting in their eyes? And what if, decades later, that same person knocked on your door asking for help, not out of love, but out of necessity? Well, that's exactly what happened to a woman who lived one of the most impactful stories you'll hear today. And believe me, what happened after all that will leave you speechless? This is the true story of someone who dedicated years of her life to a marriage, who believed in the promises, who built a family, and who suddenly heard the most painful words anyone can hear. "You're old. I don't love you anymore." Just like that, without warning, without consideration, without looking back. The husband simply turned his back and left her life like someone changing clothes. And the worst part? He did it with the nonchalance of someone who believes that people can be discarded when they no longer serve our purposes. For 30 long years, she moved forward. She rebuilt her life, found inner peace, learned to live alone, and to value herself in a way she had never experienced before. Have you ever been through that? Do you know what it's like to have to rebuild everything from scratch after being emotionally shattered? Well, she did it, and it wasn't easy. There were sleepless nights, tears shed, days when getting out of bed seemed impossible. But she fought, she resisted, and she won. Meanwhile, the man who abandoned her went on with his life believing he had made the right choice. He was free, rejuvenated, ready to live new adventures without the weight of a marriage he considered outdated. For him, that decision had been liberating. He didn't look back even once during all those years, or at least, that's what he thought. But time, my friend, has a very peculiar way of teaching lessons. And when we least expect it, life confronts us with the consequences of our choices. That's exactly what happened to him. 3 decades after that cruel separation, when she had already completely rebuilt herself, something unexpected happened. Stay with me until the end, because you won't believe the twist this story took. Imagine the scene. You're living your life peacefully. You've overcome a deep trauma. You've found your balance, and suddenly, someone from your past reappears. Not just anyone, but precisely the one who hurt you in the worst possible way. And this person doesn't come back asking for forgiveness, doesn't come back with sincere remorse, but comes back with a request that reveals everything about who this person really is. What would you do in this situation? How would you react to seeing someone who discarded you as if you were worthless, now vulnerable and in need of you? What you're about to discover might surprise you, because her response wasn't what he expected, nor what many people would imagine. And what happened after this? Reconciliation completely transformed everything you could have imagined about this story. And look, before I continue telling you what happened, I need to tell you something. If this topic is touching your heart in any way, if you've experienced something similar or know someone who has gone through a similar situation, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. Seriously, I read all the comments, and it's incredible to see how many people share such profound and true experiences. Your story can inspire someone who is going through a difficult time right now, and believe me, that makes all the difference in the life of someone who needs to hear that they are not alone. And if you're enjoying this content, click the like button now. That like is more than just a simple click. It shows that stories like this need to be told, that they deserve to reach more people. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button right now, because here, we bring real, moving stories, the kind that make us reflect on the choices we make in life. Your participation here is the fuel that makes this channel grow and bring these messages to those who really need to hear them. Every subscriber, every like, every comment helps more people be impacted by these soul-touching narratives. Now, back to the story, because I know you're eager to know what happened when he showed up at her door after 30 years. But before we get to that point, it's necessary to understand what really happened in the past, because every detail of this journey reveals something about courage, about starting over, and about the transformation that only pain can teach. She dedicated decades of her life to that marriage, years of care, attention, building a family together. She was that present wife who prepared dinner every night, who lovingly organized the house, who cared for the children with absolute dedication. She believed in that love, in those Promises that were made one day before witnesses, friends, and family. For her, it was forever. But life has these unexpected twists and turns, and when the blow came, it came in a devastating way. One day, without much warning, he simply came home and said the words that destroy anyone, that she was old, that he no longer felt that attraction, that he needed to live other experiences. And the worst part, there was someone else, a younger woman, full of energy, who represented everything he thought he had lost. The pain of being rejected by the one you love most is something that cannot be measured with words. It's a feeling that corrodes you from the inside, that takes away your footing, that makes you question everything about yourself. She didn't understand. How could someone discard decades of history as if they were nothing? How could they look at the person who had been by their side through all the difficult times and simply say that she was no longer useful? The hidden truth behind that separation was simple and cruel. To him, she had become invisible. He no longer saw the woman she was, only what he thought she no longer was. And so, he left, taking with him not only her belongings, but also her self-esteem, her confidence, and her dreams. The first few months were the hardest. She would wake up in the middle of the night feeling that pain in her chest, that emptiness that seemed endless. She looked in the mirror and saw only a discarded woman, a person who no longer had value in the eyes of the one who should have loved her until the end. But you know what happens when you hit rock bottom? You realize there's only one way out, up, and that's exactly what she did. It's never too late to start over, and she proved it in a way no one expected. She started slowly, one day at a time. First, she took care of her health, started eating right again, and began walking every morning. Then, she returned to cultivating those things she had neglected during her marriage, the books she loved to read, the friends she had lost contact with, the hobbies that had been forgotten. Little by little, she rediscovered herself, realizing that there was a whole woman inside her who had been suffocated for years. And this journey of self-discovery was the greatest gift that pain could have given her. What if the courage to start over was the true secret to transformation? Comment below. Which moment in your life would you choose to relive differently, if you had the chance to start over with everything you know today? But while she blossomed on her own, discovering who she truly was without depending on anyone, his life followed a completely different path. And it is precisely here that the story begins to reveal something profound about decisions and the power of choosing oneself when all seems lost. After that brutal separation, she found herself at an emotional crossroads that many people face, but few manage to navigate wisely. She could stay there, trapped in that pain, reliving the rejection every day and wondering what was wrong with her. Or she could do something completely different, something that required a courage she didn't even know she possessed, letting go. Not just of the marriage that ended, but of that version of herself that lived to please, that molded herself to the desires of another person, that measured her worth by the gaze of the person beside her. The truth is, she spent months on that emotional roller coaster. There were days when she woke up with renewed energy, ready to rebuild everything. And there were days when the weight of loneliness was so great that she could barely get out of bed. But at some point, in the midst of all that inner chaos, something clicked. She realized she was wasting precious time in her life waiting for someone to come back, to acknowledge their mistake, to ask for forgiveness. And then came that question that changes everything. Why do I need the validation of someone who discarded me to feel valuable? It was at that moment that the real transformation began. She didn't wake up one day healed. It wasn't a magical process where all the pain disappeared at once. It was a daily, conscious choice not to allow that rejection to define who she was. She began investing in herself in ways she never had before. She went back to school, enrolled in dance classes, and started traveling alone to places she had always wanted to visit. Each small victory was an affirmation to herself. I exist beyond this marriage. I have value beyond what he saw in me. And do you know what the most profound impact of that decision was? She realized that for years, she had outsourced her happiness. She had placed the responsibility of making her feel complete, loved, and sufficient in someone else's hands. And when that person left, she was completely lost because she didn't know who she was without that external reference. But now, for the first time in her life, she was building her own identity, a self-esteem that came from within, not from the outside. Her friends began to notice the change. The woman they knew, always a little withdrawn, always putting the needs of others before her own, was becoming someone completely different. There was a sparkle in her eyes, a confidence in the way she spoke, a lightness in the way she laughed. She wasn't just surviving rejection, she was blossoming because of it. Because sometimes life needs to take us out of a comfortable place, even a painful one, to show us what we are truly capable of. And here's something interesting. While she was on this journey of rebuilding, focused on herself, her dreams, her personal achievements, he was experiencing the exact opposite. The life he thought would be perfect, free from commitments and responsibilities, was turning out to be very different from what he imagined. But I'll tell you about that in a moment, because there's still much more of this story to uncover. And it is precisely at this point that the narrative takes an unexpected turn, because time was working in very different ways for each of them. And what happened to her in the following years will make you rethink everything about what it truly means to live. What seemed to be the end of everything turned into the beginning of something extraordinary. That woman, who had been discarded, who had been told she was too old, that she was no longer interesting, began to undergo such a profound transformation that even she herself was surprised. It wasn't just a physical change, although that also happened. It was a complete revolution in how she saw herself, how she occupied spaces, how she made decisions about her own life. She began to notice things that had gone unnoticed during all those years of marriage. She realized that there were opinions of hers that had never been expressed because she always prioritized keeping the peace. She realized that there were dreams kept in a drawer because they weren't important to him. She realized that there was a whole version of herself that was asleep, waiting for permission to exist. And now, for the first time, she didn't need anyone's permission. The physical transformation came as a natural consequence of all this. She lost weight not because she was trying to please someone, but because she began to care for her body with respect and affection. She changed her look, tried different clothes, colors she had never worn before. But the most impressive thing was the inner change. There was a freedom in the way she moved through the world now, a confidence that came from within and that nothing and no one could take away from her. She started dreaming again, something that seemed so simple, but that she had forgotten how to do. She dreamed of traveling the world, and she did. She dreamed of learning a new language, and she started classes. She dreamed of having her own business, and she took the first steps in that direction. Each achievement, however small, was living proof that it's never too late to start over, to reinvent yourself, to discover that there's a whole universe of possibilities when you stop living the life others expect and start living the life you truly want. The impact of this transformation was so great that the people around her began to ask what the secret was. How did she manage to climb out of that deep hole of sadness and reach this place of peace and fulfillment? And her answer was always the same. She stopped waiting for someone to save her and decided to save herself. She stopped believing that she needed another person to feel complete and discovered that she was already whole on her own. But do you know what's truly fascinating about this whole story? It's that while she was discovering this freedom she had never experienced before, while she was building a life full of purpose and meaning, he was having very different revelations about the choices he had made. Life has these ironies that seem like movie scripts, but that actually happen more often than we imagine. Her mindset had completely changed. She no longer woke up thinking about what she had lost, but about what she was gaining each day. She no longer looked at the past with bitterness, but with gratitude for having been freed from a prison she herself had built. And this change in perspective was what made all the difference between merely surviving and truly living. But now comes the part that really changes everything. In this story, because after 30 long years living completely separate lives, something totally unexpected was about to happen. And when I say unexpected, it's because you wouldn't see a twist like this even in the most elaborate movie scripts. It was an ordinary afternoon, one of those when she was at home relaxing after a productive day. Her life had found a pleasant rhythm, full of purpose and satisfaction. She had her routine, her friendships, her personal projects. She lacked nothing. Then the doorbell rang. She went to the door without imagining that that moment would divide her life into before and after once again. And when she opened it, she simply froze. There he was, the man who had abandoned her 3 decades ago, saying she was old. Only now, standing at her door, he was a shadow of his former self. Time had done its work relentlessly. He was aged, hunched over, with sunken eyes and the expression of someone carrying the weight of many regrets, and he was crying. Tears streamed down his face as he tried to find words to explain why he was there. The impact of that moment was overwhelming. All the memories came flooding back at once. The pain of rejection, the sleepless nights, the years of rebuilding. But she was no longer the broken woman he had left behind. She was a different person now, stronger, more centered, more aware of her own worth. And it was with this new version of herself that she had to process that surreal scene at her door. He began to speak, his voice trembling with emotion. He said he needed help, that he was going through hard times, that life hadn't been kind to him. The younger woman he had left his wife for? That story hadn't lasted. The relationship imploded a few years later, leaving him alone and bitter. He tried to rebuild his life several times, but never managed to find the stability he once had. And now, old and frail, he was there, knocking on the door of the person he had hurt in the worst possible way. But here's the hidden truth he didn't immediately reveal, but which she quickly realized. He wasn't there out of genuine remorse. He wasn't there asking for forgiveness for hurting her or acknowledging her worth. He was there because he needed something, because he was in a difficult situation and thought she would be his salvation. He came back not because he finally saw who she really was, but because he needed practical help, perhaps financial, perhaps emotional, but always with ulterior motives. She stood there, in the doorway, watching the man who once held so much power over her life and who now stood completely vulnerable before her. 3 decades apart, 3 decades of transformation on both sides, but in such different ways. She had blossomed, he had withered, she had found freedom, he had lost himself in it, and now fate brought them face to face again, in circumstances no one could have foreseen. What went through her mind at that moment? Anger? Compassion? Satisfaction at seeing him vulnerable? Sadness for what could have been? All those emotions probably mixed together, creating an internal whirlwind that she needed to process quickly because he was waiting for a response, waiting for her to do or say something. What if the choices we make came knocking at our door decades later? Comment below. Consequences always come. If you believe that life has a way of teaching us about the decisions we make. Now, what she decided to do at that moment revealed far more about who she had become than anything else could. But before we get to her decision, we need to understand exactly what he was saying there, standing in the doorway, because the behind-the-scenes story is even more revealing than anyone could imagine. He began to recount everything. The younger woman for whom he had left his wife, the one who represented everything he felt was missing in life, had become his worst nightmare. At first, everything seemed perfect. The energy, the youth, the novelty of it all made him feel alive again. But reality hit hard when he realized that the relationship had no foundation whatsoever. There was no shared history, no complicity built over years, no true love. It was just superficial attraction that dissolved as quickly as it appeared. She left him a few years later, in the same cold way he had left his wife, and then began a journey of suffering he never imagined he would experience. He tried other relationships, but none worked. He tried to rebuild his professional life, but the years were taking their toll. He tried to find some meaning, some peace, but everything seemed empty, and as time passed, he began to realize something devastating. He had destroyed the only good thing he had in life in pursuit of an illusion that never materialized. Loneliness became unbearable. It wasn't just the physical absence of someone, but that profound emptiness of knowing you'd thrown away something precious and that there was no going back. He grew old alone, bitter, carrying the weight of regrets like a stone on his back. And when his health began to fail, when financial difficulties knocked at his door, when he looked around and realized he had no one, absolutely no one, who cared about him, that's when he thought of her. The hidden truth behind that plea for help was brutally honest. He wasn't there because he finally recognized her worth. He was there because she was his last resort. He had exhausted all other avenues and now returned to the person he was certain still harbored some feeling, some good memory, some compassion that could be explored. It was a plea for help, yes, but it came from a place of desperation, not genuine love or real remorse. He wept as he spoke about the years of suffering, about how he regretted the decision he made, about how he realized too late that she was the one who truly mattered. But there was something in the way he spoke that showed his regret wasn't about hurting her, but about losing the comfort and security she provided. He wasn't sorry for hurting someone who loved him. He was sorry for losing the benefits that relationship brought him. And she, standing there, listened to it all, processing each word with the clarity of someone who is no longer fooled by empty speeches. She had learned over those 30 years that it's never too late to recognize toxic patterns, to identify emotional manipulation, to protect the peace that had cost her so much to achieve. And as he spoke, she became aware that this moment was a definitive test of everything she had become. What if true forgiveness was about freeing yourself, not about saving the person who hurt you? Write this down. My peace is non-negotiable if you've ever had to choose to protect your emotional balance even in the face of someone vulnerable who hurt you in the past. What happened next is something that no one who knows this story will ever forget, because her response didn't come from a place of revenge, but from something much deeper and more powerful. But before we get to that response, let's understand what really went through her mind during those eternal seconds while he waited there, vulnerable, exposed, completely at her mercy. She looked at the man and felt an avalanche of contradictory emotions taking over her chest. She was angry, yes, of course she was. Angry at everything he had done, at how easily he had discarded years of history, at how he had humiliated her by saying she was old. But along with the anger, there was also a strange feeling of victory. Not the petty victory of someone who wants to see the other suffer, but the silent victory of someone who knows they made the right choices and are now reaping the rewards. There was also a part of her that felt something close to compassion, because seeing someone so broken, so visibly destroyed by their own arrogance and choices, is something that affects anyone with even a modicum of humanity. But it was a cautious compassion, filtered through years of learning about self-love and about not letting empathy turn into self-destruction. She had learned in the most painful way possible that helping people who have hurt you can be a dangerous path if you don't have very well-defined boundaries. And do you know what else went through her mind? Memories. So many memories she thought were buried resurfaced in that instant. She remembered the night he said he didn't love her anymore. She remembered the tears she shed alone. She remembered how small and insignificant she felt. But she also remembered every step she took after that to get back on her feet, every small victory on the journey of rebuilding, every moment she chose herself instead of getting lost in the pain. There was also a moral conflict happening within her. The part of her that had been raised to be kind, compassionate, and helpful said that she should help, that it was her duty as a human being. But the part of her that had learned about dignity and self-respect said that she owed him nothing, that helping him would be betraying everything she had built. It would be validating his behavior and showing that no matter how much you hurt someone, that person will always be there to save you. And she had that thought that many people in that situation would have, the urge to turn her back, close the door, and let him experience a little of what she felt when she was abandoned. It would be so easy to simply say no, to leave him there in the same loneliness and helplessness he left her in. It would be a form of poetic justice, almost as if the universe were giving her the opportunity to return everything she had received. And it would be a perfectly justifiable opportunity because he deserved nothing different from what he had given her. But here's the crucial point of this whole story. She had evolved beyond the need for revenge. She no longer needed to make him feel pain to feel validated. She no longer needed to prove anything to him or to herself. The transformation she had undergone was so profound that his opinion of her, his suffering, his situation, none of that had the power to define who she was or affect the peace she had achieved. Comment below. I've evolved beyond revenge if you've ever been in a situation where you had the chance to make someone feel the pain they caused you, but chose a different path. And it was precisely from this complex mix of feelings, from this internal war between what she could do and what she should do, that the decision that would change everything was born. And when she finally opened her mouth to speak, what came out was something she didn't even know was inside her until that exact moment. She took a deep breath, looked directly into his eyes with a serenity that only someone who has been through hell and back can possess, and said something that caught him completely off guard. She didn't slam the door in his face, as many people would expect. She didn't yell, didn't unleash all her accumulated resentment, didn't take advantage of his vulnerable moment to unload everything she had kept inside for years. But she also didn't open her arms and say that everything was all right, that she forgave everything, and that he could count on her like in the old days. What she did was something far more profound and revealing about who she had become. She said she was going to help him, but not in the way he expected. She wasn't going to welcome him back into her life. She wasn't going to take responsibility for caring for him or solving the problems he had created with his own choices. Instead, she was going to show him where he could find real help. She was going to direct him to the right resources, to the right people, to the paths he needed to walk alone. Her decision was powerful because it came from a place of genuine compassion mixed with very clear boundaries. She recognized that he was a suffering human being, but she also recognized that she wasn't responsible for saving him. She owed him nothing. The fact that they had been married in the past didn't create an eternal obligation to be available whenever he needed her. And this clarity was the result of 3 decades of personal growth, therapy, self-knowledge, and learning to value herself. She explained to him, with impressive calm, that what he was seeking was not her forgiveness, but his own, that he needed to make peace with his choices, understand why he did what he did, and find a way to live with it without depending on external validation, that it's never too late to begin this inner work, but that no one could do it for him. She couldn't give him the peace he sought because that peace could only come from within. The impact of those words was visible on his face. He had arrived expecting either that she would reject him completely, confirming that he was indeed a horrible person, or that she would welcome him back, magically solving all his problems. But she did a third thing, something much more mature and much more difficult. She treated him with human dignity, without sacrificing her own peace. She showed that it is possible to have compassion for someone who has hurt you without putting yourself in a vulnerable position again. She said she held no grudge, that she had made peace with it all a long time ago, but that making peace didn't mean forgetting or pretending nothing happened. It meant she had processed the pain, extracted the lessons, and moved on without carrying dead weight, and that he needed to do the same. She wasn't part of his solution because she had already solved her own problems. Now he needed to solve his. And then she did something that closed that cycle in a definitive and liberating way. She wished him luck, said she sincerely hoped he would find his way, but that way didn't lead through her door. And with the same serenity with which she opened the door, she closed it again. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with the peace of someone who knows exactly who she is and what she deserves. And it was precisely at that moment that something even more surprising happened, something that showed that that decision had consequences she hadn't even imagined, because the true gift wasn't in how he reacted, but in what that moment revealed about the entire journey she had taken up to that point. After the door closed, she stood there for a few minutes, processing what had just happened. And it was in that silence that the most important revelation of all came. She didn't feel that weight in her chest that she usually felt when she thought of him. She didn't feel any residual anger, no regret for not having been tougher or kinder. She felt only peace, a deep peace that confirmed that all that rebuilding work, all those difficult nights, all those courageous choices to prioritize herself had been worth every second. And then the lessons began to emerge that she didn't even know she was learning all these years. The first and most powerful was that the past, however painful, has no power over you unless you allow it. For a long time, she had given his abandonment the power to define who she was. But the moment she decided to define herself by her own achievements, by her own choices, by her own strength, everything changed. The past became just a story, no longer a sentence. She learned that starting over isn't a one-time event, but a daily decision. It wasn't the day he left that she started over. It was every morning she chose to get out of bed even when she didn't want to. It was every time she chose to take care of herself instead of wallowing in self-pity. It was every small act of courage that seemed insignificant at the time, but which, added together, built a completely new person. It's never too late to make that decision, to take that first step, even if it seems impossible at the moment. Another profound lesson was about the true meaning of forgiveness. For years, she thought that forgiving meant saying everything was okay, that what he did wasn't a problem, that she had completely moved on. But she discovered that forgiveness is much more about freeing herself than about absolving the other person. Forgiving was letting go of the rope that bound her to the past. It was ceasing to carry the weight of resentment that was only hurting herself. He didn't even know how much it weighed on her. So the one who was really suffering from the lack of forgiveness was her, not him. She also learned that inner freedom doesn't come from external circumstances, but from internal choices. When she was married, she thought her happiness depended on him, on the marriage, on the family they built together. When he left, she thought her sadness was his fault, that he had taken away the possibility of her being happy. But over time, she realized that both happiness and sadness were choices she made every day. She could choose to drown in what she lost or celebrate what she gained with that forced freedom. And perhaps the most transformative lesson was about self-worth. She always measured her worth by how others saw her, especially how he saw her. When he said she was old, she believed him. When he left, she believed she had nothing left to offer. But after rebuilding herself, achieving goals she didn't even know she had, becoming a version of herself she truly admired, she realized her worth had always been there. He was never able to see it, but that didn't mean it didn't exist. And those lessons didn't stay with her alone, because what happened after that encounter at the door ended up touching other people in completely unexpected ways. Her story began to spread, not because she went around telling everyone, but because people noticed something different in her, a transformation so genuine that it was impossible not to notice. Friends who were going through painful breakups started seeking her advice. Women who felt trapped in relationships that didn't value them wanted to know how she found the courage to start over. And the most interesting thing is that she never offered ready-made solutions, never pretended to have all the answers. She simply shared her journey with brutal honesty, including the moments when she almost gave up, the days when loneliness weighed too heavily, the times when she doubted whether she was doing the right thing. And do you know what the most profound impact of all this was? She realized that her story of pain and rebuilding had become a source of inspiration for other people. What seemed like just her personal drama, her private tragedy, had transformed into something bigger. She was proving to other women that it is indeed possible to start over after 50, 60, at any age, that it's never too late to reinvent yourself, to discover who you really are when you take off all the masks and expectations that others have placed on you. She also began to realize that that encounter at the door, that moment when he returned asking for help, hadn't been about him. It had been about her. It was the universe giving her an opportunity to prove to herself how much she had grown, how different she was. It was a test she passed with flying colors, not because she was harsh or vengeful, but because she was authentic and firm within her boundaries. She showed that it's possible to be strong without being cruel, that it's possible to have compassion without sacrificing oneself. Her children, who were initially confused by the separation and later impressed by their mother's transformation, now looked at her with a newfound respect. They saw in her not just the mother who raised them, but a real woman with her own desires, her own dreams, and a life that went far beyond being a wife or mother. And this completely changed how they viewed relationships, self-love, and the importance of maintaining one's own identity even within a partnership. And that decision she made at the door, not to save him but also not to destroy him, ended up being the perfect example of the kind of person she had become. Someone who no longer needed validation from others, who didn't depend on anyone's approval, who knew exactly what her worth was and wouldn't accept less than she deserved. Someone who had learned that taking care of herself isn't selfishness, it's survival. That setting boundaries isn't malice, it's self-love. And the truth is that this whole story proves something that many people forget, that life teaches us the greatest lessons precisely in the most painful moments. That sometimes we need to lose everything to discover how strong we are. That the end of something can be exactly the beginning of something much better. And that it is never, ever too late to start over, to reinvent yourself, to choose happiness instead of resignation. But there's one last part to this story that ties everything together in a way you're not expecting and reveals something surprising about what happened next. Several months had passed since that encounter at the door. She continued living her life, focused on her projects, her dreams, the peace she had achieved with so much effort. And then, completely unexpectedly, she received a letter. A handwritten letter, a rare thing these days. And when she opened it, she saw it was from him. But it wasn't what you're thinking. It wasn't a request for reconciliation. It wasn't an attempt at emotional manipulation. It was a genuine thank you. He wrote that conversation at the door, however painful it had been at the time, was exactly what he needed to hear. That for the first time, someone hadn't saved him from the consequences of his own choices, and that this had forced him to finally look inward and do the work that needed to be done. He had started therapy, was rebuilding relationships with the children he had neglected, was learning to live with himself, and he thanked her for having the courage not to save him, because that's what truly saved him. She read that letter with tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but of relief, because it closed the cycle in a way she never imagined possible. She had done the right thing, not only for herself, but for him as well. And this confirmed everything she had learned, that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting people face their own battles, that we cannot save anyone who is not willing to save themselves, and that true growth only happens when we take full responsibility for our choices. And look, if you've made it this far, to the end of this whole story, it's because something resonated with you. Maybe you're going through a new beginning right now. Maybe you know someone who needs to hear this, or maybe you just need confirmation that you made the right choices. Whatever the reason, I'm glad you stayed with me until the end. Write in the comments, "This story touched me, so I know you made it this far and that this message made sense to you." If real-life stories like this, which make us reflect on our own choices and the power we have to start over, are the kind of content you want to keep seeing, subscribe to the channel. Because here, we don't offer magic formulas or easy solutions, but rather true stories of real people who went through difficult situations and found strengths they didn't even know they had. Oh, and click the like button below. It's not just a little button. It's your way of telling me that the time we've spent together here was worthwhile, and that motivates me to keep bringing you stories that really matter. And there's a video over here that perfectly complements this topic, talking about how to build healthy boundaries after toxic relationships. Click and continue the conversation with me there, because it's not over yet.